We are all surrounded by radiation of many forms. It is everywhere. We all know this. We also know that radiation is just energy, waves, rays, particles. Although too small for us to see, they are there. They have physical mass. Now, those of you who stay tuned into the show should have a pretty good idea of what radiation is. I discuss it quite a bit, more so frequency. This time, I would like to dive into the topic of ionizing radiation, what it does and what we will have to face in the coming years. I want to discuss what we can do to protect ourselves now, so that when the time comes we will be better prepared instead of stuck in a situation that shatters our hope and prepares us for the acceptance of death. You know, we are so in the habit of going from one horrible event to the next, we tend to forget about our recent past events. You see, we cannot forget about what happened in Japan, because this continues to be an ongoing problem. They predict that it's going to take 30 to 40 years to develop the technology just to dig the fuel rods out. Now, when it comes to nuclear power, I want to show you some things that will give you a better perspective of what we're dealing with here. But before I go any further, just off the top of your head, can anyone tell me what the purpose of a nuclear power plant is? Clean energy production, right? An electricity manufacturer, correct? A cost-efficient alternate source of electrical power that can continue to be used in the case where we cannot burn coal or gas. An important role in our economy, as the construction and maintenance of each plant creates hundreds of jobs, making millions of dollars, some of which, through local and state taxes, gets dumped right back into the infrastructure. All is good, except when it comes to the radiation. You see, what they do is they take uranium, which is one of the most abundant metals on the planet. Let me just briefly describe the process in case you're curious. After they mine uranium ore, they use solvents to separate the uranium from the ore, giving them uranium oxide, or yellow cake. They take this yellow cake and use chemicals to convert it into uranium hexafluoride. The hexafluoride is then heated, creating a gas. That gas is sealed in a cylinder where it is allowed to cool down and solidify. This hexafluoride is then enriched and converted into uranium dioxide powder. That is then pressed and formed into a small pellet about the size of a pencil eraser. Just to give you an idea of how much energy that little pellet can produce, it would be equivalent to about 1 ton of coal, or 149 gallons of oil, or 17,000 cubic feet of gas. Now, this nuclear fuel has pellets that are placed and stacked inside long, non-corrosive fuel rods and bundled together to form fuel assemblies. These are then placed inside fuel tubes that are separated by water. This fuel comes in 2 types, uranium-238 and uranium-235. Now, the U-235 fissions, meaning it breaks up and releases neutrons. Those neutrons begin to run into other uranium atoms, causing them to split. They in turn release even more neutrons, creating a chain reaction that is self-sustaining. This fission creates heat. The heat boils the water, creating steam, and the steam drives a turbine that produces electricity. Now, after about 4 to 6 years, the spent fuel rods are removed and stored at the reactor site in either large concrete steel-lined pools or airtight dry storage where they are allowed to further decay over time. The fuel rods are eventually removed and transported by rail. For example, in the US, they are transported to the Yucca Mountain Repository in Austin, Texas, where they are then disposed of or recycled. Now that's just the fuel rods. What about the radioactive gas and liquid waste the power plant produces during normal operation? Well, that is stored in tanks for a certain amount of time, and then it's released back into our environment, of course. Huh? Yes. And because the radioactivity of these materials is below the legal limit, they don't have to notify the public. Currently in the US, there are about 99 reactors in operation, mostly on the East Coast, with more under construction. The other leading countries in nuclear energy are Canada, China, France, India, Japan, the Republic of Korea, Russia, and then the UK and Sweden following closely behind. Other countries only have a handful of reactors, if any at all. Now, when uranium breaks down and goes through its chain of decay, it emits or radiates alpha, beta, and gamma particles, as well as neutrons. This is ionizing radiation, which means when these particles pass through matter, they will rip away electrons from its atoms, ionizing them. Those atoms now have a hard time binding with other atoms like it, and so the entire atomic structure of the matter becomes weakened. Ionizing radiation also includes X-rays and ultraviolet rays in the higher portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. Now, alpha and beta particles have such a strong interaction with matter that they have a very short range, and it doesn't take much to stop them. You can stop them with aluminum, but not gamma particles. No, they'll go right through that aluminum, concrete. They will go through anything until they run into lead. And that really will only slow them down. That's why it has to be a certain thickness of lead to effectively trap those particles. And they don't all get trapped. Now, they can be deflected, but only with a magnetic field. So X-rays, UVC rays, anything below these on the spectrum is considered non-ionizing radiation. So at this point, we should have a very basic but clear vision of one of the major contributors to radioactivity on our planet. And as they painstakingly try to contain it, Japan is an excellent example of how some things are not within our control. And now the entire planet is paying the price through bioaccumulation. But these nuclear plants are only but one concern when it comes to radiation. Nuclear arms, of course, but then there is the sun. We've been having massive solar flares hitting us, folks. Our planet's first line of defense, our magnetosphere, has been acting funny. And unless you are out in your neighborhood taking measurements of the radiation getting to the surface, you don't really know what's getting through in your neighborhood. But signs will tell. The birds, the insects, the trees. Look at the very tops of trees and look to see if the branches at the very top have leaves or not. These are indicators. It's not just the sun. There are things in space that are happening right now. Things are exploding. They just had a press release about a twin neutron star, kilonova. Oh, did you forget already? And that's why they do what they do. How many of you who actually watched that performance were not excited, but could feel nothing but concern watching it? They fed you something with sugar on top. Take the sugar off, and it's all bad news. They say these two stars merged 130 million years ago, and they are 130 million light years away. Before they couldn't see it, but now they can see it, which is why they are talking about this now, because the light is just now getting to us. The energy from those stars are just now reaching us. You see, there are things out there that can affect the Earth. activating natural nuclear reactors, also increasing volcanism. That is a magnetic issue. That flowing magma is creating a magnetic field. You can see the lightning volcanoes produce when they erupt. The magnetic field of the magma interacts with other magnetic fields, and you have an increase in volcanism. Not good. It does not matter where the volcano erupts. We cannot have volcanoes erupting all over the place, turning the atmosphere into acid. So the radiation that comes off of electrical devices, microwaves, this type of radiation, to put it simply, disrupts frequencies. So they can be just as bad, if not worse, although they are a bit more difficult to defend against. Here I want to focus in on the things you can do to defend against the radiation coming from the sources I have just discussed, the ionizing radiation. So, when they talk about radioactive iodine, cesium, strontium, these are just a few of the many elements that are produced by nuclear fission, which, by the way, can occur naturally and can be triggered by cosmic rays. These nuclear fission products are the polluting elements that you are looking to protect yourself from as they give off that ionizing radiation. And this is how radiation spreads the way it does, almost like a virus. It gets into the water, the air, and the earth. It gets carried by wind and precipitation. It ends up in the vegetation, it ends up in the animals, and eventually ends up inside us. Now, the only thing that can protect you from the direct ionizing radiation of the sun is the magnetosphere, our atmosphere, about 300 feet of dirt, or a lead bunker with magnetic shielding. Realistically, in a scenario where we did, for some odd reason, lose our shielding, then people would have to seek refuge in mines, deep underground facilities, and the caves in the mountains, if they can make it there. And even if you do make it underground, you're going to then have to worry about earthquakes that will be triggered by solar rays. And now, because you're deep underground, you could wind up sitting right next to the hypocenter or focus of the earthquake. But that is a worst case scenario. The very real immediate problem is the contamination of our life support, meaning air, water, food. All three, no matter where you live, are potentially contaminated. And you don't truly know what the levels are in your area, do you? Fortunately, these days, it is relatively easy to find that out. Geiger counters are readily available. You'll want to research which ones are the best, of course, as there are limitations depending on the model. At the low end, however, there are devices that you can plug into your cell phone that will detect radiation, as well as apps that will detect EMF radiation. Having one or more of these devices will give you the ability to measure the radioactivity of things in your home, such as granite countertops, or flooring, pottery or antiques, clocks, recycled metals, kitty litter, the toys that your kids play with. You can test your air and water filters for radioactive buildup. Use it to test your food, the soil in your garden, the water coming through your pipes. You can detect exposure coming from nearby power plants, medical X-ray labs, or if you happen to live close to a uranium mine. I believe you will get your money's worth if you have one of these devices. How radiation affects your body all depends on the dose of radiation and how long you've been exposed to it. At the very minimum, very low doses of radiation with long-term exposure can cause degenerative diseases, even cancer. But with detection methods, you have time to remedy those issues. You have time to get rid of the radioactive contamination in your home or office. You have time to distance yourself from it if need be. And you have time to cleanse yourself of this in case of a catastrophic event like a Fukushima or Chernobyl. You're going to need to know what's going on within the first few hours, at the most 24 hours. You're going to need numbers and time of exposure in case you have to evacuate your area. Even if you live a few hundred miles away, you're going to have to expect fallout to rain down, sometimes in the form of radioactive dust that you can actually see. But it must be kept out of your eyes, out of your lungs and stomach, and off your skin. You're going to need to remain indoors The more walls and ceilings between you and the fallout, the better. Large concrete buildings work well. If you are caught in your home, the center of your basement is ideal. Radiation poisoning is no joke. You want to know what the symptoms of ionizing radiation sickness are? Everything. Not to be confused with EMF radiation sickness. When someone gets radiation sickness, the symptoms start mild. Gastrointestinal issues, maybe some vomiting, and the next day, the person may feel perfectly fine. But in another day or two, the symptoms come back, with death following closely behind it. And that person is gone in about a month. And the symptoms, oh my, we're talking about fevers and infections, swelling, tumors, internal bleeding and acidosis of the blood, bleeding of the gums, mouth sores, bleeding of the brain, bloody vomit, bloody diarrhea, bruising of the skin and blood spots, the inability to heal wounds, hair loss, seizures and shaking fits, and at the end, rapid dehydration that can result in the loss of around 20 liters of bodily fluid per day. Acute radiation syndrome. I really don't know why they call it that. There's nothing cute about it at all. Now, hopefully, many of us will not have to experience this. There is the issue of low-dose, long-term radiation, however. That, again, contaminates our life support, and there are ways to cleanse yourself. Which brings us back to nuclear fission products. For example, if the thyroid is saturated with natural iodine, then radioactive iodine cannot stay in the body. It is at that point surplus that the body has no room for, so it expels it, if you're healthy. Radioactive cesium causes damage to the cells emitting gamma rays. Folks, it doesn't really matter what the element is. If it is radioactive, one particle is like a microscopic X-ray machine in your body. It will harm you. Now, you can't blame the scientists for this one. The government, they are the ones who determine what is legally safe and what is not. And they will happily raise the number outside of what is actually safe for a few more bucks. Now, there are a few people who think that they have some type of secret technology that can neutralize ionizing radiation. If they do, you can only use what is within your means, and most of us do not have access to such technology. This comes down to what you can physically shield your body with, your distancing, and what you can consume. This is what is going to make the difference. Pectin-rich and chlorophyll-rich foods, chlorella, spirulina, seaweed, kelp, wheatgrass, the minerals found in sea salt, black and green tea, sesame seeds, rosemary, ginseng. Siberian ginseng is better. Ginger, garlic, onions, beets. Reishi mushrooms are excellent. Parsley, kale, broccoli, cabbage, sauerkraut, Brussels sprouts, horseradish, apples, avocados, lemons, coconut oil. These things will detox radiation from the body as well as aid in recovery. You want to go a bit harder? Vitamins A, C, and E supplementation helps improve recovery and radiation injury. Minerals, calcium, magnesium, the minerals in sea salt, potassium orotate, nansen iodine. Want to go a bit stronger? DMSO, or dimethyl sulfoxide, zeolite clay, and other earth clays. It is the magnetism of the clay. Charcoal, germanium-132, if it is organic. Brewer's yeast, and even bee pollen. Folks, it is just a small list of the things you will find that will help you in your fight against radioactive contamination. And I will continue to bring you that information in time, because I do want to get back on the topic of EMF radiation. Right now, you hopefully have a few things to go look up. And within your research, I pray that you will find more. You may come across a remedy or a piece of accessible technology that has been overlooked. We need all the help we can get, ladies and gentlemen. Be grateful that we have knowledge of these things that can at least help us to prepare for when things get really bad. And they probably will. Get yourselves prepared spiritually, mentally, physically, because all three of those things will come under attack. And when they do, you must be ready, for you will show those opposing forces that the one thing the human race does well is survive.